My name is Becca. I am 28 years old. And exactly 20 minutes into my baby shower, I found out my mother-in-law forged $42,000 in debt to make my husband divorce me. She didn't warn him. She didn't tell her friends. She faked the papers, stood up at the country club, and invited her whole social circle to watch. Just seconds before she spoke, my great-aunt Ruth looked at me and said 3 words, "Let them talk." I stared across the room. My husband's family was standing by the gifts. Fake statements, audience, phone camera rolling. What they did next was supposed to break me. It didn't. Welcome back to Revenge Galaxy, where real family moments become the stories you can't stop listening to. If this one hits close to home, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. I grew up in a single-story ranch house just off Highway 81 in Waco, Texas. 3 tight bedrooms, faded linoleum floors, and a broken train AC unit that hummed all summer. If you have ever been the person your in-laws look down on just because you didn't inherit a country club membership, you know exactly how my life feels. I was raised by my dad. He worked as a mechanic at Firestone until he passed away when I was 20. After that, my grandmother took me in. When her health failed, it was just me and my great-aunt Ruth. Ruth is my grandmother's sister. She has severe arthritis in both hands, but she still drives her 1998 Buick Century to H-E-B every Tuesday to buy my groceries. I am an inventory manager at a regional plumbing supply warehouse. I make $48,500 a year. I wear steel-toed Wolverine boots to work. I pay my own bills. 4 years ago, I married Greg. He teaches 8th grade Texas history at a public middle school. He is quiet, patient, and usually wears faded Levi's and plain gray t-shirts. He sees me for exactly who I am, but his family is a completely different world. His mother, Linda, is a retired commercial real estate broker. She wears Chanel No. 5, gets her hair blown out twice a week, and drives a white Lexus RX 350. His father, Tom, owns a chain of 6 dry cleaners across Travis County. Then there is his sister, Chloe. Chloe is 23. She has 12,000 followers on Instagram. She posts daily videos about her morning matcha routine and expensive Pilates classes. From the day Greg introduced me, the math in their family was clear. I was the charity case. I was the girl from the wrong side of the highway. Linda never yelled at me. She never threw a fit. She used pity like a knife. It was a cold, performative sympathy that left me with nothing to say. For our wedding present, Linda handed me a $50 Olive Garden gift card. She patted my arm and said, "I know you aren't used to eating out much, sweetheart. Treat yourself." That exact same week, she paid $15,000 for Chloe's European summer vacation. Tom never directly insults me. He just pretends I am invisible. When I sit at their dinner table and ask him how his day was, he stares at the large grandfather clock in the hallway, checks his gold Rolex, and asks Greg about football. Every Sunday, Greg and I go to their house for family dinner. I used to try to win them over. Last November, I spent 3 hours baking my grandmother's peach cobbler from scratch. We arrived at 6:14 p.m. I walked into the kitchen and set the warm glass dish on the island. Linda looked at it, picked it up, and shoved it to the very back of her stainless steel KitchenAid fridge. She pulled out a store-bought Whole Foods fruit tart instead. "We are really trying to watch our refined sugars this month, honey," Linda said. "But it is the thought that counts." Chloe stood leaning against the counter, typing on her iPhone 15. She looked up at my cobbler through the glass fridge door. "Yeah, that looks a little heavy for us," she laughed. I just stood there. I didn't cry. I swallowed the lump in my throat and helped set the table. Greg held my hand under the table the entire night. He knows how they are, but he always hopes they will soften. They never do. 7 months ago, I found out I was pregnant. We drove to Linda and Tom's house to tell them the news. Greg was practically shaking with excitement. He held my hand and announced that they were going to be grandparents. Linda did not smile. She did not jump up to hug us. She slowly lowered her coffee mug onto the coffee table. She looked down at my scuffed boots. Then she looked across the room at Tom. "Well," Linda said. Her voice was completely flat. "That changes things, doesn't it? No congratulations. No warmth. Just a heavy, suffocating silence." Later that evening, around 9:30 p.m., Greg was out on the patio talking to his dad. I realized I left my car keys on the dining table. I walked softly down the hallway. The lights in the dining room were dim. Linda was standing by the mahogany table. Tom had walked back inside and was standing right next to her. I stopped in the shadows. Linda was holding a thick stack of printed papers. Even from 10 feet away, I could see the bright orange Discover Card logo printed at the top of the first page. Linda tapped her finger hard against a number on the paper. She leaned in and whispered to Tom, "If Greg sees this, he will have no choice. The paperwork is ready." Tom crossed his arms. "Just wait for the shower. Do it when her whole side of the family is there. Make it stick." I held my breath. I quietly backed up, turned around and walked to the kitchen. My heart was pounding against my ribs. I had 0 credit card debt. I didn't even own a Discover card. I had no idea what papers she was holding, or what they were planning for my baby shower. I should have asked right then. But I didn't. I poured a glass of tap water from the kitchen sink. My hands shook so badly that water spilled over the rim and pooled on the granite counter. A minute later, Greg walked into the kitchen holding his jacket. He smiled, wrapped an arm around my waist, and asked if I was ready to go home. I nodded. I didn't tell him what I saw. Not yet. If I told Greg his parents were forging credit card statements to ruin our marriage, he would demand proof. I didn't have any. All I had was a shadow, a whisper, and a bright orange logo. The next morning, Tuesday, I took a half-day off from the warehouse. At 8:15 a.m., I drove my 2014 Honda Civic to Great Aunt Ruth's duplex on Elm Street. The inside of her house always smells like Folgers coffee and Vicks VapoRub. She was sitting in her floral recliner watching the morning news. I sat on the edge of her sofa and told her everything. I told her about the printed papers, the Discover card logo, and what Tom said about doing it in front of my side of the family. Ruth didn't gasp. She didn't act shocked. She just tightened her swollen, arthritic hands around her ceramic coffee mug. "Do you have a Discover card?" Ruth asked. "No," I said. "I only have a basic debit card from Chase Bank. I have never had a credit card in my life." Ruth looked out her front window at the street. "Linda is building a paper trail," Ruth said quietly. "A fake one. They want to make Greg think you are drowning him in secret debt. If they embarrass you in front of a crowd, they think you will panic and leave without a fight." She took a slow sip of her coffee. "You just go to work. Leave this to me. I know a few people." I didn't know what Ruth meant, but I trusted her more than anyone else in the world. 3 weeks later, the trap started to close. Linda called me on a Thursday at 4:30 p.m. Her voice was bright, sweet, and entirely fake. "I am hosting your baby shower," she announced. "I already put a $500 deposit down at the Pine Creek Country Club for the second weekend of next month." My stomach dropped. I wanted a simple backyard barbecue at our house. Just hot dogs, lawn chairs, and my friends from work. I told her that. Linda sighed heavily into the phone. "This is my first grandchild. My friends expect a certain standard. We can't serve hot dogs on paper plates, sweetheart. Please don't be difficult about this." I folded. I said okay. The following Saturday, Chloe insisted on taking me to Target to set up the baby registry. I thought she actually wanted to bond with me. I was wrong. She brought a portable ring light and recorded herself the entire time. She walked down the aisles, talking to her phone screen instead of me. I picked up a scanning gun and scanned a $35 Graco diaper bag. It was plain black and practical. Chloe saw the screen, laughed out loud, and pointed her phone camera at me. "No, guys, my sister-in-law is literally trying to register for a cheap plastic sack," Chloe said to her followers. "We are upgrading her to the $150 Petunia pickle bottom bag. She doesn't know any better." She reached over, took the scanner out of my hand, and tossed it into the shopping cart. I stood there in aisle 14, holding a pack of plain white cotton onesies, while she strutted away to the premium stroller section. A week before the shower, Linda emailed me the final guest list. There were 65 names on the sheet. I scrolled through the document on my phone. I only recognized 5 names. The rest were Linda's tennis partners, Tom's business associates, and Chloe's influencer friends. I called Linda at 7:10 p.m. "Linda, my dad's old friends aren't on this list," I said. "My coworkers from the warehouse aren't on here. You didn't include them." "Honey, the country club has a strict fire code in that banquet room," Linda said smoothly. "And honestly, would your warehouse friends even feel comfortable there? The dress code is semi-formal. We don't want them to feel out of place and embarrassed, do we?" It wasn't a question. It was a fence keeping my people out. She allowed exactly 5 of my relatives to come, including Great Aunt Ruth, just so she could have the audience Tom asked for. She was setting the stage, and I was walking right onto it. 3 days before the shower, a FedEx box was left on our front porch. Inside was a dusty blue Seraphine maternity dress. The price tag was intentionally left attached, $225. A yellow sticky note was pressed against the plastic wrapping. It was Linda's neat, cursive handwriting. "Wear this on Sunday. We hired a professional photographer and want you to look appropriate." I held the fabric between my fingers. It was soft, expensive silk, but holding it felt like putting on a uniform. I was just a prop for her country club friends. On Friday at 6 p.m., I drove over to Aunt Ruth's house to drop off her refill of lisinopril. The Texas heat was still thick, but the inside of her duplex was dark and cool. Ruth was sitting at her small kitchen table. Right next to her salt and pepper shakers was a thick brown manila envelope. "What is that?" I asked, setting her pill bottle on the counter. Ruth tapped her knuckles against the paper. "It cost me $500. A man named Gary drove down from Fort Worth to hand it to me this morning. He used to be a police detective. Now he does private work." My chest tightened. I stepped closer to the table. "Ruth, what did he find?" Ruth didn't open it. She just slid the heavy envelope off the table and dropped it into her worn leather purse. She looked up at me, her face completely calm. "Exactly what we needed. You just go to that party on Sunday. You smile. You eat the fancy food. You let them talk." Sunday arrived. By noon it was 98 degrees outside. Greg drove us to the Pine Creek Country Club. The parking lot was packed with shiny Mercedes and BMW SUVs. My stomach churned the entire drive, but I kept my hands folded in my lap. I wore the dusty blue dress. We walked through the heavy double-glass doors and into the Magnolia banquet room. It didn't look like a baby shower. It looked like a corporate networking event. There were 8 large round tables covered in crisp white linen. Each table had a towering centerpiece of expensive white hydrangeas. In the front of the room, there was a massive pastel balloon arch framing a single oversized velvet chair. Linda was standing near the entrance, holding a glass of sparkling cider. She wore a navy blue tailored pantsuit. "You made it," Linda said as we walked in. She looked me up and down, checking to make sure I wore the dress she bought. She gave a tight, satisfied nod. She did not tell me I looked nice. I walked over to the velvet chair and sat down. I looked around the room. My 5 relatives, Aunt Ruth, my 2 cousins, and my uncle, were seated at a small table in the very back corner, right next to the swinging metal kitchen doors. Every time a waiter walked out with a tray, the door bumped against my uncle's chair. Linda's friends and Tom's business partners filled all the front tables. They were laughing, sipping mimosas, and holding wrapped boxes. Tom stood near the back bar, nursing a drink and checking his watch. He gave Greg a firm pat on the back, but he didn't even look in my direction. Over by the gift table, Chloe was busy. She had set up a tall metal tripod and a bright LED ring light. She was adjusting her phone, making sure the camera angle captured the velvet chair, the balloon arch, and the crowd. She pressed the red record button and smiled at her screen. "Hey guys, we are at my sister-in-law's baby shower," Chloe said to her phone, her voice dripping with fake excitement. "We went all out for her today." The room buzzed with chatter. Waiters carried plates of miniature crab cakes and spinach puffs. Greg brought me a plate of food and sat on a small stool next to my chair. He squeezed my hand, totally unaware of the trap that was already set. At exactly 1:15 p.m., the waiters cleared the plates. The room grew slightly quieter. It was time to open the presents. Linda picked up a silver spoon from the dessert table. She walked to the center of the room, right in front of my chair. Clink, clink, clink. Linda tapped the edge of her crystal water goblet with the silver spoon. The low hum of 65 people talking stopped instantly. Waiters paused by the kitchen doors holding silver trays. Everyone turned to look at the center of the room. "Thank you all for coming," Linda said, her voice projecting across the room. "We are going to start opening the gifts now." For exactly 20 minutes, I sat in that oversized velvet chair and performed. Chloe brought me boxes wrapped in thick, glossy paper. I carefully pulled off the ribbons. The gifts were beautiful, but they felt like props to show off how much money Linda's friends had. A $400 sterling silver baby rattle from Tiffany & Company, a $250 dry clean only cashmere baby blanket. A pair of tiny, stiff leather Gucci loafers for an infant. I smiled, held each item up for Chloe's glowing ring light, and said thank you. Greg sat on the stool beside me, writing down who gave what on a yellow legal pad. He was completely relaxed, laughing at the tiny shoes. I kept my eyes on the back corner of the room. Great Aunt Ruth sat quietly. She had eaten half of her chicken salad. Her worn leather purse was resting squarely on her lap. At exactly 1:35 p.m., 20 minutes into opening the presents, Chloe handed me a small, square box. Before I could reach for the ribbon, Linda stepped forward again. She tapped the glass with the spoon a second time. "Before we open the final gifts," Linda said, her voice shifting from a host's cheer to a heavy, practiced sadness, "there is something we need to bring to light, for the sake of my son, and for my future grandchild." The banquet room went dead silent. The only sound was the soft hum of the central air conditioning. Linda reached down into her beige Michael Kors tote bag resting on the gift table. She pulled out the thick stack of printed bank statements. Even in the bright banquet lighting, the orange Discover Card logo at the top of the pages was unmistakable. She turned away from the crowd and faced Greg. She didn't look at me. "Greg, sweetheart," Linda said softly, holding the papers against her chest like a shield. "Your father and I didn't want to do this today, but we realized you are out of time. You need to know the truth about who you brought into this family." Greg stopped writing. He put the pen down on the legal pad. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Linda held out the papers. "We accidentally received some of her mail at our house. Greg, she has $42,000 in maxed-out Discover cards, hidden debt. She has been lying to you since the day you met." A collective gasp swept through the front tables. A woman in a pink sundress covered her mouth. Two of Tom's golf buddies leaned in closer. Chloe stood directly to my right. She didn't put her phone down. She rotated the camera away from the balloon arch and zoomed in straight on my face. The red recording dot pulsed steadily. My hands went completely numb. The velvet chair felt like a trap. I stared at the papers Linda was holding. I could see my full legal name typed neatly across the top right corner. They had gone through the trouble of forging a complete multi-page financial history just to destroy me in front of an audience. Greg stood up from his stool. His face lost all its color. "Let me see those," he said, reaching for the papers. "Don't bother reading them, son." Tom's voice cut across the room from the back bar. He wasn't holding a drink anymore. He stood with his shoulders squared, looking at Greg with hard, unblinking eyes. "She is bleeding you dry," Tom said loudly. "She is going to trap you with this baby and stick you with the bill. You need to file for divorce on Monday morning before her debt becomes yours." The silence in the room was suffocating. Greg looked down at the papers in his hands, staring at the bold, forged balance of $42,108.50. He looked at me, his eyes wide with pure confusion. He was waiting for me to deny it. He was waiting for me to scream, or cry, or defend myself. I didn't do any of those things. I placed my hands flat on my knees, took a slow breath, and looked past the front tables. By the swinging metal kitchen doors, Great Aunt Ruth slowly pushed her chair back. The metal legs of Great Aunt Ruth's chair scraped loudly against the polished hardwood floor. In a room full of 65 people holding their breath, that single scraping sound echoed like a gunshot. Ruth stood up. She smoothed the front of her cotton floral blouse, picked up her heavy leather purse, and started walking toward the front of the room. Because of her arthritis, she didn't walk fast. She walked with a slow, deliberate limp. But she kept her chin up, looking right past the tables of women in their expensive sundresses. Tom pushed himself off the back bar. "All right, that is enough," Tom called out sharply. He started walking down the center aisle. "Ruth, sit back down. This is our family business." Ruth didn't even look at him. She kept walking until she reached the balloon arch. She stepped right between Linda and Greg. "Ruth, please," Linda said, forcing a tight, polite smile for the audience. "This is highly inappropriate. We are trying to handle a crisis." "Hand me those papers, Greg," Ruth said, completely ignoring Linda. Greg looked down at the stack of Discover Card statements. His hands were shaking. He handed them to Ruth. Ruth reached into her purse and pulled out her cheap plastic reading glasses from Walgreens. She pushed them onto her nose and looked at the top sheet. "Discover Card," Ruth read aloud, her voice clear and steady. "Ending in 4092. Outstanding balance, $42,108.50. She lowered the papers and looked directly at Linda. "Did you print these at Tom's dry cleaning office, Linda? The black ink is smearing on the edges. That usually happens when you buy cheap replacement toner." Linda's neck turned red. Her fake smile vanished. "Those came directly to our mailbox. It is a federal offense to steal mail, and it is a crime for her to hide this from my son." "And it certainly is a crime to forge financial documents," Ruth said calmly. She opened her leather purse. She pulled out the thick brown manila envelope with the brass clasp. "When you told my niece there was a fire code issue, and she couldn't invite her friends," Ruth said, "I got a bad feeling in my stomach. I knew you were isolating her, so I spent $500 of my own retirement money. I hired Gary. Gary is a private investigator who used to work for the Fort Worth police. He is very good at looking up real numbers." A woman at table 3 gasped softly. Tom stopped walking. He froze halfway down the aisle, right next to a tray of empty champagne glasses. Ruth undid the brass clasp. She pulled out a single crisp white paper. It had a thick watermark across the background. "This is a full certified credit sweep," Ruth said, holding it up. Gary pulled it yesterday morning directly from Experian. It lists every single open account, loan and line of credit attached to her social security number. Ruth handed the certified paper to Greg. "Read the total debt balance, Greg," Ruth told him. Greg looked at the paper. His eyes scanned the lines. He blinked hard, as if his vision was failing him. "Zero," Greg whispered. "Read it louder," Ruth instructed. "It says zero," Greg said, his voice cracking. "Zero open credit card accounts. Zero debt." The banquet room broke into nervous whispers. The ice shifting in the water goblets sounded deafening. Chloe lowered her ring light by an inch. She looked at her phone screen, then at her mother, her face twisting in confusion. "Mom? What is she talking about?" Linda snatched the fake Discover statements back from Ruth's hand. Her perfectly styled hair shifted as she shook her head aggressively. "That investigator is lying. She probably paid him to make a fake report. She is scamming us." "Why would she scam you, Linda?" Ruth asked quietly. "She pays her own rent. She buys her own groceries. She has never asked you for a single dime." Ruth looked at the faces of Linda's wealthy friends sitting at the front tables. Then she looked back at Linda. "My niece doesn't need your money," Ruth said. She reached her swollen, arthritic hand back into the thick manila envelope. "But you need hers, don't you?" Linda stopped moving. Her eyes darted to the brown envelope. Tom took a fast step forward, his heavy dress shoes hitting the floor hard. "Shut your mouth, old woman. Do not say another word." Ruth didn't flinch. She pulled out a second stack of papers. These were much thicker, bound by a heavy black binder clip. "Let's talk about why you really want Greg to divorce my niece today," Ruth said. "Let's talk about what Gary found filed at the Travis County Courthouse last Tuesday." Tom rushed the balloon arch. His face was dark red, and a thick vein bulged on the side of his neck. He reached his large hand out to snatch the black binder clip from Ruth. Greg stepped directly in front of him. Greg pressed his palm flat against his father's chest and shoved him hard. "Do not touch her," Greg said. His voice was low, but it rattled in his chest. Tom stumbled back a step. His expensive leather shoes squeaked against the polished wood floor. Ruth did not even blink. She handed the heavy stack of papers to Greg. "Read the top sheet, Greg," Ruth said. "The one with the blue courthouse stamp in the corner." Greg took the papers. He looked at the top page. "The room was so quiet I could hear the air vent rattling above our heads." "It is a Chapter 7 bankruptcy petition," Greg read. He sounded out of breath. "Filed by Thomas and Linda. Liabilities exceeding $1.2 million. A woman at the front table dropped her metal fork. It hit her china plate with a loud, sharp clatter. Linda closed her eyes. Her shoulders slumped forward. The beige Michael Kors bag slipped off her arm and hit the floor, spilling a tube of lipstick and a pack of gum onto the carpet. "Turn to the third page," Ruth instructed. Greg flipped the heavy sheets. "That is the deed to the big house on Willow Creek Drive," Ruth told the room. "Gary found out they took out a second mortgage with Wells Fargo 2 years ago, for $350,000. They drained the entire account to keep up appearances, to pay for country club dues and Chloe's European vacations. The house is completely underwater. The bank sent the first foreclosure notice last month." Chloe gasped. She finally lowered her ring light. The bright LED bulb pointed down at the floor, casting harsh shadows across her expensive boots. "Mom?" Chloe said, her voice shaking. "Are we losing the house?" Linda didn't answer her. She just stared at the white tablecloth on the nearest table. Tom pointed a shaking finger at Ruth. "You have no right to look into our private business. We had a bad year with the dry cleaners. The supply costs went up. We are handling it." "You are handling it by trying to destroy my niece," Ruth said. She stepped closer to Tom. She was a foot shorter than him, but she looked 10 feet tall. "You are broke," Ruth said. "You have no business, no house, and no money left. You knew Greg would never let you go homeless, but you also knew Greg has a wife and a baby on the way. You knew his teacher salary couldn't support all of you." I sat frozen in the velvet chair. The puzzle pieces violently snapped together in my head. Ruth turned to look at me. Her eyes were sad but fierce. "They needed Greg to divorce you," Ruth explained. "If Greg thought you were hiding $42,000 in debt, he would leave you. Then he would move back in with them, or they would move into his house. They needed his clean credit score. They needed his income to save themselves. You and the baby were just in the way." The banquet room erupted into loud whispers. The country club friends, the women Linda tried so hard to impress, were staring at her with pure disgust. The people she wanted as her audience were now her judges. Linda finally looked up. She looked at Greg. "We were desperate, Greg," Linda cried. Real tears spilled over her expensive makeup. "We didn't know what else to do. We are losing everything. We raised you. You belong with us, not with her." Greg looked at his mother. He looked at the fake Discover card statements still scattered on the floor. Then he looked back at the real courthouse documents in his hand. I watched my husband realize that his own parents had built a trap to break his family apart, just to pay off their own mistakes. He slowly walked over to me. He stood right beside my velvet chair. Greg looked at his mother and father. "You wanted to ruin her today," he said, his voice completely hollow. "You printed fake bank statements. You invited all your friends to watch. You wanted a show." Greg reached down, took my hand, and gently helped me stand up from the oversized chair. I held onto his arm. "Well," Greg said, "you got one." Greg held my hand. His grip was tight, but it wasn't angry, it was steady. We started walking down the center aisle, leaving the oversized velvet chair empty behind us. We walked past the tall centerpieces of white hydrangeas and the plates of half-eaten crab cakes. Linda reached out as we passed. She grabbed the edge of Greg's gray t-shirt. "Greg, please," Linda begged, her voice cracking. Her mascara was running down her cheeks. "We are family. You can't just walk away from us. We have nothing left." Greg stopped. He looked down at her manicured hand clutching his shirt. He gently, but firmly, peeled her fingers off the fabric. "You aren't my family anymore, Mom," Greg said. He didn't yell. The sadness in his voice was heavier than any anger could be. He looked at me, then at my stomach. "My family is going home." I stopped right next to him. I looked at Linda. I didn't feel scared of her anymore. I didn't feel intimidated by her Chanel perfume or her country club friends. I just looked at a woman who had broken her own life into pieces. "You paid a $500 deposit for this room," I said quietly. The whole banquet room could hear me. "You bought me a $225 maternity dress just to make me look like a prop. If you were really losing your house, you could have just asked us for help. Greg would have emptied his savings account for you. But you couldn't swallow your pride long enough to ask me for anything. You just wanted me gone." Linda stared at me. Her lips trembled. The realization washed over her face. She had spent her last remaining dollars on a stage play that ultimately exposed her own ruin. Tom didn't look at us. He was staring at the floor, surrounded by the fake Discover card statements he had printed. We turned our backs and kept walking. We reached the small table in the back corner by the swinging metal kitchen doors. My uncle and my two cousins were already standing. Great Aunt Ruth pushed her cheap reading glasses back into her worn leather purse. She snapped the purse shut. She didn't say a single word to the wealthy women at the front tables. She just gave a single, satisfied nod and followed us out. We pushed through the heavy double-glass doors of the Magnolia banquet room. As the doors swung shut, I heard a woman's voice from one of the front tables. It sounded like one of Linda's tennis partners. "Linda, what on earth is going on with your house?" the woman asked, her voice sharp with judgment. The heavy glass doors clicked shut, cutting off Linda's sobbing response. The lobby of the country club was completely quiet. The thick plush carpet absorbed our footsteps. We walked past the front desk, past the men in white polo shirts carrying golf clubs, and out the front entrance. When Greg pushed open the outside doors, the 98-degree Texas heat hit us like a brick wall. The midday sun glared off the hoods of the luxury cars in the parking lot. Nobody spoke on the walk to our car. Greg unlocked our 2014 Honda Civic. He opened the passenger door for me. I slid onto the hot gray cloth seat. He gently closed the door, walked around to the driver's side, and got in. He put the keys in the ignition, but he didn't turn them. The car was suffocatingly hot. Greg just gripped the top of the steering wheel with both hands. He pressed his forehead against the hot black plastic. His shoulders started to shake. He took a deep, ragged breath. He was crying. Not loud, angry sobs, just the silent, heavy tears of a man grieving the parents he thought he had. I didn't say it was going to be okay. I didn't tell him not to cry. I just reached across the center console and put my hand on the back of his neck. I rubbed my thumb against his skin. We sat in the stifling heat of that parking lot for 10 minutes, letting the reality of what just happened settle into our bones. Finally, Greg lifted his head. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, turned the key, and turned on the AC. "Let's go home," he said. The drive down Highway 81 was completely silent. The only sound was the hum of the tires against the hot Texas asphalt and the rattling of the AC vent on the dashboard. We pulled into the short concrete driveway of our rented house at exactly 2:15 p.m. Our yard was patchy, and the front porch steps creaked when we walked up them, but it was ours. It was safe. I walked straight into the bedroom. I unzipped the $225 dusty blue Seraphine maternity dress. I didn't hang it up. I folded it, walked into the kitchen, and shoved it into a plastic H-E-B grocery bag. I tied the handles in a tight knot and set it by the front door to donate. I put on my oversized gray sweatpants and a faded cotton t-shirt. I felt like I could finally breathe again. We didn't bring a single gift home from the country club. The Tiffany rattle, the Gucci shoes, the cashmere blankets. We left all of it sitting on the gift table under the balloon arch. None of it belonged to us anyway. It belonged to the illusion Linda built. At 6 p.m., we were sitting on our worn fabric sofa. We ordered a large pepperoni pizza from Domino's. It cost $24.50. We ate it off paper plates on the coffee table. It tasted better than any of the miniature crab cakes at the country club. Suddenly, Greg's cell phone buzzed against the cheap wood of the coffee table. The caller ID said Chloe. Greg stared at the screen for a long time. The phone vibrated across the wood, buzzing loudly in the quiet living room. He didn't want to answer it, but he picked it up and pressed the green button. He put it on speaker and set it back down on the table. Greg? Chloe's voice was thin and panicked. She was crying, not her usual performative, camera-ready pout. This was a real, ugly, terrified cry. I'm here, Greg said. His voice was flat. It's a disaster, Chloe sobbed, her breath hitching. After you left, everyone started whispering. Half the tables just got up and walked out before the cake was even cut. The country club manager came over to Mom. He demanded she pay the remaining $1,200 catering balance right then and there. He said her account was flagged. Greg leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He looked at the floor. What did she do? She handed him her Chase Sapphire card, Chloe said, her voice shaking. It declined, in front of Mrs. Henderson and the whole tennis committee. The manager told her she couldn't leave until the bill was settled. Dad had to pull one of his golf buddies aside and beg him to write a check to the club so we could leave the parking lot. I sat quietly next to Greg. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt a deep, heavy sadness for a family that cared more about impressing people at a country club than welcoming their own grandchild. Why are you calling me, Chloe? Greg asked. There was a pause on the line. I could hear the faint sound of cars passing in the background. She must have been sitting outside. Dad's dry cleaning accounts are frozen, Chloe whispered. The bank locked them on Friday, just like that investigator said. Mom is locked in her bedroom. Dad is screaming at his lawyer on the phone. Greg, my car payment is due on Tuesday. It's $640. Dad said he doesn't have it. If I don't pay it, the dealership is going to repossess my Jeep. She wasn't calling to apologize for her mother's fake credit card trap. She wasn't calling to ask how I was doing. She was calling because the bank vault was finally empty, and she needed Greg to open his wallet. Greg looked at me. His eyes were tired. He reached his hand out, and I laced my fingers through his. I can't help you, Chloe, Greg said. Greg, please. It's just one payment. You have savings. I have a wife, Greg said, his voice dropping an octave, solid and unmovable. I have a baby coming in 2 months. I am a middle school teacher, Chloe. I don't have $640 to fix Dad's lies. But what am I supposed to do? She cried. You have 12,000 followers on the internet, Greg said quietly. Maybe one of them has a car you can borrow. Greg reached out and tapped the red button on the screen. The call ended. The living room went perfectly silent again. He picked up his phone, opened his contacts, and clicked on his sister's name. He pressed block caller. Then he scrolled down to his mother's number. Block caller. He found his father's number. Block caller. He set the phone face down on the coffee table. He leaned back against the sofa cushions, pulled me against his chest, and rested his chin on the top of my head. It's over, he whispered into my hair. I closed my eyes and listened to the steady beat of his heart. We stayed on that sofa until the living room turned completely dark. At 8:30 p.m., Greg finally sat up. He walked into the kitchen, threw the empty cardboard pizza box into the trash can, and walked to the front door. He turned the deadbolt lock until it clicked. Then he turned off the porch light. The next morning, Monday, my phone alarm went off at 5:15 a.m. I got out of bed and laced up my steel-toed Wolverine boots. Greg put on his gray teacher's polo shirt. We drank our coffee at the small laminate kitchen table. We didn't talk about the baby shower. We didn't talk about his parents. We just talked about our grocery list. It felt like the first normal morning of my entire life. At 11:30 a.m., I was standing on the concrete floor of the plumbing warehouse, checking a shipping pallet of brass pipes. My phone vibrated in my front pocket. It was a text message from Greg. He sent a photo. His old high school friend Mark still lived on the same street as Linda and Tom. Mark had taken the picture from his car window on his way to work. It showed the big brick house on Willow Creek Drive. There was a large white moving truck parked in the driveway. A man in a neon vest was hammering a bright yellow bank foreclosure sign into the perfectly manicured front lawn. Below the photo, Greg typed a single sentence. "They are really gone." I stared at the screen for a minute. I didn't smile. I didn't feel the urge to celebrate. I just locked my phone screen, put it back in my pocket, and went back to counting brass pipes. When Friday arrived, Greg and I got paid. We drove to the Chase Bank drive-through window at 4:45 p.m. Greg withdrew exactly $500 in cash. He put the crisp bills into a white envelope. We drove straight to Great Aunt Ruth's duplex. It was raining, a warm, heavy Texas downpour. We knocked on her door, and she let us in. Her house smelled like chicken soup and Folgers coffee. Greg set the white envelope on her kitchen table, right next to her salt and pepper shakers. "What is this?" Ruth asked, looking at the paper. "It is for Gary, the private investigator," Greg said. "You spent your retirement money to protect my wife. I am paying you back every single cent." Ruth looked at the envelope. She reached out with her stiff, arthritic fingers and pushed the envelope back across the table toward Greg. "Gary gave me a discount," Ruth said, her face completely serious. "And you have a baby coming in 6 weeks. Take that money, go to Bye Bye Baby. Buy a good, safe car seat. That is all the payback I want." Greg tried to argue, but you do not argue with Great Aunt Ruth. We left the duplex with the money in Greg's pocket and a warm Tupperware container of chicken soup in my hands. The weeks moved forward. The Texas heat finally broke, and the late October air turned cool. We didn't hear from Linda, Tom, or Chloe. We didn't try to find out where they moved. We just lived our quiet life. On a Tuesday morning, at exactly 3:10 a.m., my water broke. We drove to Providence Memorial Hospital. The streets were completely empty. The hospital lobby was bright with harsh fluorescent lights. A nurse put me in a wheelchair and pushed me up to the maternity ward on the 4th floor. Labor lasted for 14 hours. It was the hardest, most exhausting day of my life. Greg never left the side of my hospital bed. He held my hand, wiped my forehead with a cold, wet washcloth, and fed me ice chips from a plastic cup. At 5:22 p.m., our daughter was born. She weighed 7 pounds and 2 ounces. She had a full head of dark hair. When the doctor placed her on my chest, she let out a loud, healthy cry. Greg leaned over the bed and kissed my forehead. His face was wet with tears. An hour later, a young nurse walked into our room holding an electronic tablet. "Congratulations, Mom and Dad," the nurse smiled. "I need to set up your visitor security list for the next 2 days. Who is allowed back here to see the baby?" Greg looked at me. I looked at him. "Just one person," Greg told the nurse. He spelled out Great Aunt Ruth's full legal name for the security form. "Okay, great," the nurse said, typing on the screen. "And what about the grandparents? Should I put them on the approved list?" Greg didn't hesitate. He didn't look down. He just held our daughter a little closer against my chest. "No," Greg said firmly. "They are not on the list. If anyone else shows up, tell them this room is empty." The next morning, at exactly 9:15 a.m., the heavy wooden door to my hospital room slowly pushed open. Great Aunt Ruth walked in. She was carrying a red plastic Target bag. She walked with her slow, deliberate limp across the linoleum floor until she reached the side of my hospital bed. Greg stood up from his chair and gently took the bag from her. Inside was a large plastic container of fresh-cut fruit and a soft, simple pink cotton blanket. Ruth didn't say a word at first. She just leaned over the clear plastic hospital bassinet. She looked down at our daughter, who was sleeping quietly, wrapped in a standard hospital swaddle. Ruth reached out her swollen, arthritic hand. With incredible gentleness, she brushed the back of her knuckles against the baby's soft cheek. "She is beautiful," Ruth whispered. Her voice was thick. "She has your dad's nose." I felt a hard lump form in my throat, but it wasn't from sadness. It was from a deep, overwhelming sense of relief. My dad wasn't here to see his granddaughter, but his memory was safe in the hands of the woman who had protected me when I had nothing. 3 days later, we drove home. We didn't bring our daughter back to a massive brick estate on Willow Creek Drive. We brought her back to a small, rented house off the highway with a patchy front lawn and creaky porch steps. I dressed her in the plain white cotton onesies that Chloe had laughed at in aisle 14. I packed her diapers and wipes into the $35 black Graco bag. We don't have country club memberships. We don't have matching luxury SUVs or European summer vacations. But we also don't have $1 million in hidden liabilities, and we don't have to fake who we are just to sit at our own dinner table. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and the baby is asleep in her crib, I think about that oversized velvet chair in the Magnolia banquet room. I think about the $500 deposit and the fake Discover card statements meant to destroy my marriage. "Linda," Tom and Chloe spent the absolute last of their energy and resources to build a stage that only ended up exposing their own ruin. They wanted to make me look small and worthless. But when you are forced to sit quietly and watch people perform their lies, you eventually realize you aren't the small one. You are just the one holding the truth. My husband chose our family over the illusion of theirs. My great-aunt spent her safety net to buy my freedom. And I finally realized that my worth was never defined by the price tag on a dusty blue maternity dress. If you have ever sat quietly while someone tried to tear you down, only to watch them dismantle their own lives instead, you know exactly how heavy this journey feels. You know what it costs to stand your ground, to protect your peace, and to build a life that is actually real. If this story made you feel seen, or if it reminded you of your own quiet strength against the people who tried to make you feel small, please leave a like and subscribe. We all need to know we aren't walking these hard roads alone.